And happy to see that we have a lot of our partners that have been able to join us today. So we will be focusing primarily today on just introducing some of the projects that we've been running throughout the year, some of the programs that were launched at COP27 and looking to building on that work towards COP28 and really thinking about exactly how it is that we position Africa and we position climate action within the continent, and we push for the priorities that really matter in the continent. So it is helping the continent, or really positioning the leadership of the continent in climate action, and really making sure that we are highlighting and prioritizing the actions that will help the world to be more responsive to the needs and priorities of the continent. So to get us started with some remarks, I will hand over to Mr. Nigel Topping, who most of you know as the UN high-level climate champion for COP26, and he's also the senior advisor for FSD Africa. Nigel.
Thank you so much, Bogolo, and hello everyone. It's really lovely to join you. I'd say that the main reason I'm here is to learn, and then see what I can do to connect. You know, I was lucky enough in my time as a UN high-level climate champion to visit Africa several times and to really to make new friends. I see many of them on the call here, and I've been really impressed with the leadership of Bogolo and people like James, Mark, John Paul, Joseph, Franny, got to know more recently, and I've become a little bit obsessed about the challenge of mobilizing finance in emerging markets, so I've learned a lot from those visits and learned a lot from the paper which Mahmoud and I commissioned from Nick Stern and Vera Songwe, which laid out kind of what I call an engineering approach of exactly what needs to be done. So and then recently I was in Nairobi with FSD Africa as they were celebrating their 10th anniversary, and I was just struck by how much innovation is going on that it seems that that it's hard to find out about. And so and Jamie, it's great to see you here, because I then discussed with James, with JP, with Mark, with Bogolo, that the sharing strategies call, which Jamie runs regularly, which is a global convening like this amongst partners all working on complex problem of mobilizing finance globally, has been a real inspiration for me, and where I've learned a lot. So we thought, why not try something similar, but grounded in the region. So after me, it'll all be African leaders who are working on the innovations needed to drive the change. And I've become convinced that this mobilizing issue is fundamentally one of institutional learning, which means individual learning. So I'm hoping to learn a lot. I know I'll learn a lot from, and I encourage all of you to invite other partners and other peers to join in the future calls to really build momentum. So, because the faster we learn, the faster we can innovate, the faster we can mobilize the finance needed for what I know James is channeling the sort of preparation for the Ruto Summit. It's called Climate Positive Development, and a whole new sort of narrative where African innovation and African skills are co-creating the future, not passively waiting for someone else to do it. So really excited to join you. Thank you, Bogolo. And now I'm in listening and learning mode. Back to you, Bogolo.
Thank you, Nigel. Always great to see you, and great that we could learn from what's been happening with the sharing strategies with Jamie, and build on the work that you were doing as a climate champion and continue to be a climate champion. So to get us started with our session today, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers to share across the breadth of climate action in the continent. And we really wanted, because everyone is looking forward to the Kenya Africa Climate Action Summit, that we just get started with that, get some updates on what the thinking is towards that particular summit, and how we can all really work towards good deliverables and making it an action-focused and action-centered summit later in September. And to get us through that session will be James Mwangi, who's the founder of Climate Action Platform. And many of you on this call are very familiar with James, so I won't really go through the his entirety of profile. But we all know that he's been really quite active in the climate action space in Africa and really helping to create this narrative that brings in development into climate action. So thanks, James, for joining us, and thank you for partnering with us in delivering these sessions, and over to you.
Thank you, Bogolo and Nigel and Jamie for, of course, setting the ball rolling on the climate, on the sharing strategies front in terms of convening all of this and seeing a lot of friends, allies, and partners already on the call. So fantastic to be among friends. An advantage of being among friends and allies is you hopefully don't need to start right at the beginning. And so I'll kind of give a very quick update on where things stand with the Climate Action Summit. By way of very quick recap, underpinning the Climate Action Summit has been President Ruto's buy-in to the idea of climate positive growth. This idea that Africa has this fundamental set of structural, competitive, and comparative advantages that are underappreciated in the world and are crucial to bring not just as Africa's approach to climate, but to the center of Africa's overall growth strategies, because they represent huge potential opportunities and they proceed along multiple strands. The summit was conceived as an opportunity to not just share Kenya's progress on this or Kenya's positioning on this, but to also kind of evangelize this perspective among other African countries, celebrate similar progress in other African countries, and begin to make this a new narrative for the continent. Crucially, it is not conceived as a standalone event. Indeed, the work that CAFE and others have been doing in support of the presidency and other organs of government have been really geared towards a year-long kind of sequence of activities. And you will have seen it in some of the messaging that President Ruto, among others, has put out there around energy and other things at the Berlin Energy Conference a few weeks ago or a few months ago now. And upcoming, very importantly, in Paris at the Financing Summit, where he views his messaging having been asked to play a bit more of a prominent role as an African voice alongside Prime Minister Prime Minister Motley and President Macron, his role as being very much anchored in this intersection of climate positive growth and the future of financing. So there's a lot going on. I'm going to try and very quickly share a screen to give a little bit of a sense of where we stand in terms of thinking about the structure of the summit, because I was just to contextualize that we're talking about not just the summit, but Paris, Marrakesh, and Dubai, and how we are really putting in place enablers for a new way of thinking. I'm trying to share a screen. I don't know if I'm allowed to, and I should have asked this, Andrea, earlier. And if not, I'm certainly happy just to very quickly talk to what I have and then share it as an attachment later.
You should be able to share now. Just let me know if it's possible.
Great. It does seem to be working. And so I'm going to share an extract from the draft agenda that CAPE has been developing in partnership with the Office of the President and other actors. And one of the things I wanted to clarify is the role that the CAPE team is playing, which is we have been asked by Ali Mohammed, the Kenya climate envoy and senior climate advisor to the president, to basically staff his office in the run-up to the summit. His office has been charged with really shaping the agenda and content of the summit in partnership with the Ministry of Environment as lead ministry among at the ministerial level. And the ministry has been also working with the African Union. As tends to happen in the early stages of this type of thing, there have been a number of different perspectives on how to structure this. But over the last few weeks, we've gotten quite clear and directional and directive guidance from the president that really points to what I'm going to share as an agenda, as likely, it's not the final agenda, it's what an agenda looks like several months before and only a few weeks after alignment was achieved. But it's the beginnings of where this is going to end up, barring major shifts. So very quickly trying to So I'll focus on the overview very quickly, which is, on one level, the challenge has been, how do you convene a climate summit that touches on everything that people expect in a climate summit, but really centers the idea of opportunities and growth? And that is through a framing that recognizes that there are impacts of inaction that we need to recognize. So talk about the negative impacts and have some sessions that talk about that. Those include, sub-tracks on conflict and security, disaster risk, migration, economic shocks, and health. And then there's a set of lenses at the bottom, which are around kind of what are the levers that we will need to build an understanding of, and the critical enablers. And very often you see conferences organized around these. But to be clear, the actual thrust of the conference is going to be organized around the stuff in the middle. So what does climate positive growth look like? It is about articulating the ways that we can realize economic value from protecting natural assets. It's about really looking into specific industrial sectors and outlining specific opportunities to green Africa's own consumption and production. And finally, it is about the potential to really think proactively about the economics of large-scale carbon removal. So think about it as there are protection tracks that will take a very traditional conservation angle. There will be a whole set of industrial tracks that are really focused on spaces where we think Africa has a compelling edge or a particular angle to bring, particularly around the question of how to abate sectors, how to abate emissions, and how they speak to competitiveness and comparative advantage. And then there is this entire new way of thinking that says, we need to be talking about billions of tons of net removals annually by the middle of this century. And how do we begin to actually socialize the opportunities in that? I am not going to try and go through each of the days in detail, but the summit runs from the 4th to the 6th. It's overlaid with Africa Climate Week. The current thinking is that the first day is really anchored in what is the potential here? Let's get people to understand when we say opportunity, what's the size of the prize? What might it look like, and so on, and really anchoring that this is not a typical climate discussion about all of the ways correctly that Africa is suffering, but it's also about the opportunity as and that framing and landing that framing, while recognizing that this is not something that Africa is doing for the rest of the world, really directly tackling the way that climate change is already negatively affecting Africa and the urgency of action. The second slide, the second day is really around creating these sets of tracks, and this will grow, where you're having a lot of parallel sessions, taking detailed dives into what are specific either opportunities, examples of action, potential areas of mobilization. You can expect this to really kind of proliferate. And the idea is to make this as much as possible, not about a general direction of travel, but about this is what is being done with mangroves in Ghana and Sierra Leone. Here is what the economic opportunity around biochar in East Africa looks like. Here's what's been done already in terms of scaling up e-mobility and what are the typical barriers and examples of policies that are getting it going, and so on and so forth. And again, these are illustrative, and I'm very conscious of time, so I won't dwell. And then finally, on the third day is what does it take to create the conditions for this to feed into action? There's a question of, what might a Nairobi declaration look like that can then go from Nairobi into the UN General Assembly and subsequent meetings? And then what are announceable commitments that can also sit on in this day? And this is the last day. On the first day, you have some senior international and global figures and leaders, but this is the day, the last day is when we are really looking to have a proper head of state engagement, in part so that they are receiving the conclusions and reacting to them, rather than setting a vague and non-committal direction. And ideally laying the groundwork for things like, what might it look like to set in place country plans? What might it look like to commit to particular pathways, and so on and so forth? So that's the structure of this, and that segues into what's happening in parallel and hopefully complementarily is Africa Climate Week. So this doesn't end, and for many people, all that will happen is the logos on some of the stages that they've been engaged in will shift a bit, but we're taking, the hope is to really plug this in seamlessly into the overall agenda for Africa Climate Week that continues as a set of gatherings and setups. We're thinking about a set of invitations that range from venture capitalists to policymakers, to funders, and to carbon buyers. And thinking about how you're curating tracks that make sense for each of those and coding these things so that a financier knows what are the sessions that they may be able to go to and so on and so forth. So let me pause there. Again, presenting something in 5 minutes, 30,000 foot level, I've probably already gone long and provided less information than I intended to, but hopefully that gives you a sense of where this is going. The key thing to be clear about is I know that there's been a lot of questions around, will this remain as focused on the opportunity angle, climate positive growth? There are a few other angles. The unambiguous guidance we've received from the presidency now is actually, if anything, center the opportunity framing and the growth opportunities even more than is currently being done, and bring those as well into the narrative for Paris. So that's the guidance we've received. And we continue to work with Ali's office on that basis.
Yeah.
So pausing there and open to questions or anything else. Thanks for
Thanks, James. I think the one question that has been brought up is, how do people get involved? How do organizations get involved? Is there direction you could point them, and then we'll do more questions later because I'm a little pressed for time. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. Organizations looking to get involved, I think reach out to the CAFE team, and we will be happy to kind of connect the dots among organizations. We're reaching out to organizations. There's a lot of openness to either take up an agenda stream or engage in other ways. So just reach out to us. I will drop a few email addresses in the chat and afterwards. And I think the team in the background is actively working on looping in as many organizations as we can.
Great. Thank you so much. And I see Mark is saying, especially on how to organize side events and so forth. So great to give us that steer, James. I think it was important that we have a little bit more understanding. All eyes have been on Paris, but I think we should also start shifting our direction to Kenya and hoping for more strong commitment around those announceables. So next, we will have a very brief we'll have a brief chat here with JP, Jean-Paul Adam, who we've had the pleasure of really partnering with in the last year in coming up with the UN Compendium of Projects with a particular focus on Africa. And it was still with JP and UNECA that we partnered on the African carbon markets. I saw Joseph a little earlier on. And we will now be co-hosting the Africa Regional Roundtable, which is a follow-up of the Africa Regional Forum from last year. And he'll just take us through some of exactly the intended purpose of the regional forum and the outcomes from last year and what to expect in the next one. JP?
Thank you very much, Bogolo, and good afternoon to everyone from Addis Ababa. Great pleasure to connect once again and to engage, I think, on one of the most critical aspects of delivering climate resilience across the continent, and that is to ensure that there is this, what is in the current environment, a counter-cyclical flow of resources and finance into African sustainable development orientated projects and projects that actively contribute towards solutions for climate change. A lot of African leaders leading up to the Nairobi summit are framing this summit in the context of Africa as the continent of solutions. And this is really about the transformation of the economic model in Africa, away from one which is focused mainly around extraction and export of resources towards the development of more sustainable value chains, and one which focuses precisely on, for example, tapping into carbon credit markets, because that incentivizes the right type of development across the continent, where nature is really seen as the asset which underpins the ability of African countries to undertake successful economic transformation. So the climate finance roundtables, the first of which was held last year in Addis Ababa, recognizes that Africa is, in a sense, left behind by private sector investment in climate resilient sectors. Only 14% of Africa's climate finance comes from the private sector. And to put that in context, that's the lowest of any region in the world. The next lowest region, which is Southeast Asia, has in excess of 30% of its climate finance from the private sector. And so there's a huge gap in terms of the ability of channeling these resources into climate resilient projects across the African continent. And the roundtables aims to really spotlight initiatives that make a huge contribution towards this African economic transformation, and which also contributes towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. So, for example, from the projects that were presented in Addis Ababa in 2022, there are 4 actually across the continent, which are now at a stage where they're being financed. And they are projects which are really transformative. I won't go into too much detail, but to cite 2 of these, we have a $200 million, it's actually a $250 million project in Mali on renewable energy, which has raised money from the World Bank, but also with blended finance initiatives, and also supported by the EBRD, and which aims to address some of the most vulnerable populations in terms of access to energy. And we also have a project in Kenya, for example, around the transition towards renewable energy appliances, in terms of financing these appliances. And this is supported by philanthropy, but with a strong opportunity for commercial investment going forward. And it's precisely this type of project where you may require some support at the startup phase, either coming from multilateral development banks, from philanthropies, but which then leads to a dramatic transformation at the national, and in some cases a regional level, allowing investment from the private sector to go ahead at larger scale. So in 2023, we'll be following up the roundtables with firstly, next week, an event in Abidjan in the margins of the Africa CEO Forum, where there will be matchmaking of certain selected projects. These include projects in Nigeria, for example, on e-mobility, which is aimed at procuring e-buses and charging infrastructure in Nigeria. We have the development of carbon markets, and specifically in Malawi, the opportunity for integrated carbon credit programs for restoring forests and also improving cook stoves, essentially clean cook stoves, recognizing the challenge in that country. We have a waste to power project in Nigeria, aiming to generate 24 megawatts and processing 270,000 tons of solid waste. E-mobility ventures in Rwanda and Kenya are looking at the two-wheeled electric vehicles market. Energy platforms in Chad around energy platforms for rural and urban electrification, and organic fertilizer ventures in Kenya, aiming to transform local agricultural production. So these are some examples of the types of projects that are being put forward, and in many cases require seed funding, but which are fundamentally aimed at transforming the economic environment. I would like to highlight that many of these projects also feature as part of wider regional initiatives that can be truly transformative. Firstly, the push across the continent for the development of high integrity carbon credit markets. And we have a number of projects that have been put forward by the Congo Basin Climate Commission, which are aimed at investing in, for example, climate smart agriculture and agroforestry and sustainable rice production in the Congo Basin. This is facilitated by the creation of Africa's first regional registry for carbon credits, covering 16 countries of the Congo Basin, and allowing these countries to ensure a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom in terms of setting a harmonized standard in terms of the types of carbon credits that they would like to issue, and around the projects that bring real benefits to communities. And that's the main focus. And another initiative worth highlighting is the Great Blue Wall Initiative, which aims to channel financing into climate adaptation through marine protected areas, but looking particularly at the value chains that can be built around ecotourism around these marine protected areas, as well as the sustainable fisheries value chain by investing, for example, in the cold chain and allowing more locally owned processing to take place. So these are some of the initiatives that are potentially very transformative through these climate finance roundtables. And we hope that everyone can participate in these events. The one coming in Abidjan is quite niche and bespoke, but we are also aiming to have roundtables featured in the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi. And we have an agreement in principle from the Kenyan government that this will be the case, because they really want to emphasize the opportunity going forward. So allow me to end by highlighting three, what I will call enabling factors that we have to address to be able to make to move from this more ad hoc financing of transformative projects into a true systemic approach. Firstly, we need to empower African financing institutions, and this starts with the African Development Bank, but it also involves a large number of other African institutions that need more reliable access to financing so that they can allow these transformations to take place, and that includes Afrexim Bank and other partners. The African Development Bank has been pushing hard to receive SDRs, which allow it to increase its lending at affordable rates. Secondly, we need to really deliver in terms of blended finance, again, recognizing that there is an Africa premium, that there is a risk perception around the continent, and this is seen in the actual investments in climate finance across the continent, which are insufficient. And this means the deployment of partial credit guarantees, in some cases political risk insurance, but really allowing the flow of finance to allow the private sector to play the role that they should be able to play across the continent and deliver this sustainable African transformation. And finally, the focus has to be not just on the extraction of resources, but investing in the value chains. And all of the projects that I've mentioned are projects which transform the opportunities for further value addition at various parts of the economy, whether it be through energy, through carbon credit markets. They bring livelihoods to people who are currently very vulnerable to climate change, and therefore empowering them to take meaningful steps in their futures. I'll stop there and thank you very much.
Great.
Look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, JP. So last word is you would like for those that are here and more to join us for the ARR June 5th. Do you have
June
a link
5th,
you want to drop on the
absolutely.
chat?
I'll do that in the chat. Join us on June 5th and work with us for the Africa Climate Summit, and also really push the message on financing for African institutions and blended finance at the Paris Summit. Thank you.
Great. So this is to prove that there are actual climate action projects. There's a pipeline of projects, and those that keep saying that there's liquidity, excess liquidity, we are proven that there are projects, and we'd like to bring those two things together. So join us to hear more on those projects and to also provide advisory and support to countries in delivering and tailoring their NDCs so they're more responsive to investor appetite. Thank you, JP, for that. And next, I'm really trying to rush, but I don't want to take too much to force people to speak less here. Next, we have Franny Lothier, who's the senior partner and CEO of Southbridge Investment, and she has an exciting fund on called the Buzumbi Fund, and she will be telling us a little bit about it and how they are financing projects across the continent. Franny,
thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Bogolo. It's a pleasure to be connected, and great to see that the technology that Jamie has perfected in sharing strategies can be useful for the work that we're doing. So thank you, Jamie, for joining us as well. I'm going to share just a few thoughts on where we are on something that we launched at Sharm el-Sheikh, which was an impact fund to support the AFR 100 initiative of the African Union and under execution by Auda Nepad, where 34 African countries have committed to restore over 120 million hectares of land through reforestation of agricultural land, reforestation, and also agroforestry. And the fund that we launched, which is called Vumbuzi, is coming from a Swahili word, which means to innovate, to discover. And that fund was launched in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we are now in the process of putting it to work. And we will be, by COP28, coming with a few portfolio companies where we would have made some initial investments. So that's sort of the timeline we are on. So what is Vumbuzi all about? It starts with those 34 African countries that have made that commitment, helping create a pipeline of projects that start with the community level, because the primary impact driver we're looking at is for communities to create jobs, to create opportunities for revenue, whether it's from agricultural activity, but also to create carbon assets that hopefully can then be swapped or traded or exchanged under the African Carbon Markets initiative that I'm hoping we'll hear a bit more about later. So what is innovative about the approach? We thought, first of all, the engagement of the community so that they become the drivers of the creation of those assets, regardless of whether these would be state-led activities driven by large corporations who are working to create plantations and other large-scale solutions, but also by using technology to aggregate smallholder contributions to creation of those carbon sequestration assets. The second bit that we put in place that was innovative is to try to leverage philanthropic capital in order to tap into the liquidity in the market. So that's using philanthropic capital for capital cost buy down while raising funds on the market, and to use actually the multilateral development banks, because they are better rated than commercial banks, to enter into that market raise. And so combining MDB balance sheets with philanthropic capital, we can stretch the limited resources to raise more funding. Then the second part that is equally innovative, and here I'm grateful to Nigel and Catherine who are on this call, is to work then with the providers of guarantees, because once you pay down the risk for interest rate risk, you still have the non-repayment risk for the principal. And through a guarantee instrument, we hope to remove that risk as well. And that would provide concession level type or concessionary finance level type assets for carbon sequestration, which could then tolerate the 3 to 5 year period where, as an investor, you don't generate any revenues, and therefore use private funding and the private equity model, but with community impact, with raising funding from the markets, and with delivering carbon assets for the future that are affordable and sustainable. And then the last bit of innovation then is how we assess, certify, and therefore make available those carbon sequestration assets. Working with a startup company in Rwanda and the Rwanda Space Agency, we are using tree-by-tree verification with a unique QR code to each tree that is planted, or each square hectare of grasslands or restored mangroves, or whatever the carbon asset that will be created. And using those certified, verifiable, traceable certificates to make the value then of them in the market much more sustainable, much more sure, and therefore to secure a good price. This means a farmer who has 5 trees can participate in the carbon market, which as of now, they are excluded from that kind of participation. So that's what the fund structure looks like. It's a $2 billion fund. Right now, we have already identified the pipeline. We are in due diligence with a subset of the pipeline to be able to make those early investments. And our first foray into the market is planned for Q3 this year, so that by COP28, we are able to come with a few of the portfolio companies to start to talk about how they're generating those assets, what they're doing, how they got funding, and then we can go from there to scaling up across the rest of the 34 countries. So that's in a nutshell Vumbuzi. Our partners for delivering it, in addition, of course, to the AFR 100 countries, is an anchor investment from the Bezos Earth Fund. Of course, the support and partnership with the World Resources Institute, and then through Ted Audacious, the $100 million grant that was put towards restoration in Africa. So that's how we've started. Our partner for going to the market is the Arab Bank for Development in Africa. And we've since then also been engaging the African Development Bank, IFC, the World Bank, and FAO. And then the rest, I think we will keep building from there on out. So let me stop here in the interest of time, and happy to address any questions that may come from participants. Thank you, Bogolo.
Thank you so much, Franny. A question that I've seen pop up is how will this, and I think it's from Mark, how will this work on Kenya's ambition to plant 15 billion trees? And then, of course, how do farmers participate in this? Because you specifically mentioned that verification is by one tree. So those with 5 trees can participate. So how do we work on crowding the smallholder farmers to participate here? And then lastly, those that are looking at project development in the carbon market space, how long does it take, or what would you say are the 3 things to look out for as they get started so they can work on the research? Thanks.
Yes, thank you for those questions. So for states in the pipeline that we're building, about 1/3 of the assets are going to be coming from state-led initiatives. So if a state like Kenya would like to participate in the fund, we are engaged actually in Kenya, but not so far at the state level. Mostly it's at the community level and with large-scale plantations with community engagement. But if for a state-led effort, we are looking for between 8 and 10 states. So far, we have identified 6 that are willing to and interested to work with us to take these solutions to fruition. They come in then with the number of hectares that they would like to restore or to reforest or to support agroforestry schemes. And they come in to get concessional level debt from this facility. So that means it will be at the level of IDA. That's the equivalent that we're trying to reach by this financing methodology that we're using. And therefore, a state could borrow at IDA level rates in order to reforest or restore land or build up agroforestry. And the way to participate is just to engage with us or as we are engaging with them. For the communities, how do they get engaged? So far, we've been identifying them individually, like sourcing based on the kind of assets we would like to build. But very soon we will be putting together a platform where they can actually apply. At the moment, WRI has the competition that's running under a fund called Terra Fund. It's the second version of that. So that's the early investment that WRI is running. And the graduates from that investment will then be funded by Vumbuzi. So we have a partnership between Terra Fund and Vumbuzi. And then for the last question, in terms of what needs to be in place for this to work, the first place is once you are engaged and have the financing approved, the day that the trees are planted, we have the digital company that does the tech side of the solution come in and issue a unique QR code to each tree that's planted, capture an image of that tree, which then is geolocated on that specific day and then linked up by satellite to our scanning system that then is able to visit every so many weeks to check on where things are. We can zero down to an individual tree. The farmer's name is recorded along with the tree. So for example, if a farmer has given up their land under a lease, they would appear as the owner of the land, and the lessor would be the one who appears as the one managing the assets, and the person who planted the tree could also be identified. So you can actually link all the sources from ownership to operational to the actual plantation and maintenance of the assets. And therefore, participation is quite straightforward.
Thank you very much. I think that clarification is quite helpful, guides people on what next and how to get involved with you. Thank you. So next we have Helen Brume. Helen, are you there? So Helen is a director at Afrexim Bank, and she'll be talking on climate finance innovations. We've had the pleasure of working with Afrexim Bank and thinking about the various tools, financial tools that have proven to work for the continent, and then also tackling this very prisky issue that I see at the bottom people are debating on African risk and the perception of risk. So Helen, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bogolo. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to apologize in advance. We did not intend to attend the upcoming summit in Kenya, but I'll use this opportunity that I've been given just to speak about some of the initiatives that Afrexim Bank has been working on. Ironically, using Kenya as our flagship, we've launched an $800 million climate adaptation support fund for Kenya. And the funds primarily would be used to help Kenya build small-scale dams. Kenya, as you know, has acute water shortage programs. And I think this ties in with our overall approach to playing our part in helping the continent resolve the issues stemming from the impact of climate change. So our approach really is more towards providing support in the areas of climate adaptation and support, obviously, by financing relevant projects and also supporting other initiatives. So this 800 million program with Kenya is our flagship. Our second thing that we're working on is we are in the process of launching a $300 million concessional funding program. And I say concessional funding because the intention is that climate finance and climate adaptation projects will be one of the primary beneficiaries of that fund. The fund would be separate from Afrexim Bank, and the idea is to keep it separate so that we can hopefully catalyze more funding to support it. Obviously, 300 million is a very far cry from what the continent needs. The fund will be funded from directly from our profits, $50 million each over the next. We'll start with $200 million, $50 million over the next 4 years, and the idea is that we'll try and bring in some of the other multilaterals to support us as time goes on. So that has been put forward to our shareholders, and it should be approved at the next board meeting. The third thing, or I say the fourth thing that we're working on is a biodiversity initiative, and this is something that we're working in partnership with UNECA. And the goal is to establish a link between biodiversity and carbon markets, and try and ascribe a value to Africa's biodiversity and translate it to carbon credits. And the idea is, with the sovereigns who own the rights to these biodiversity credits, we need to help them extract the right value and help them use that value to develop their economies. It's still at very preliminary stages, but in concept, we have approvals to go ahead to mobilize the necessary research to support that. And hopefully, before the end of the year, we can have something to work or to share with the sovereigns to get their buy-in and then take it to the next level. And then finally, we are a part of the ACMI initiative, lending thought process. We have also several clients that have approached us wanting to find out how they can also be instrumental to the African carbon credit markets, and we're working with them on that as well. And in terms of other direct support to some of the identified projects, and I know John Paul made reference to some projects. We're talking to the promoters of the e-mobility transaction in Nigeria. And to the extent that, we do find projects that we're interested in, we encourage everybody here to bring those projects to our attention. Again, Afrexim Bank is committed to supporting projects that help, obviously to combat the impact of climate change on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And I think one last takeaway from you is that the Afrexim annual meetings are upcoming.
Yeah.
I think it's next month. Yes. When are they?
On the 18th to the 21st of next month.
18th to 21st of next month. And I believe that, as was with the AFDB annual meetings, climate finance will be right at the top of the discussion. So those that are interested should be following the conversations when Afrexim, and we're all looking at the innovative leadership of Afrexim to come up with some financial instruments that will lead the charge here to drive more climate finance into the continent. So we're particularly looking forward to those annual meetings. If you have anything to share with us, please put it on the chat, Helen, so people could follow those conversations and if they want to get involved. Next, we have our last speaker. Very pleased to see Joseph has managed to join us, and Joseph is the Africa Vice President of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet and a member of the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative Steering Committee, co-founder, co-conspirator. Very pleased to see you, and he will give us a quick update on what's happening with ACME since we launched at COP27. Over to you, Joseph, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Bogolo. It's really good to see old friends, new friends, and a lot of you are very familiar with ACME. So I'll aim to more provide voiceover as I describe what ACME is on the progress we've made so far and where we're looking to land by COP28. Soraya will be helping me with the slides. Thank you, Soraya. If we could put them in presentation mode, please. As you can see, ACME is a collaboration, as Bogolo said, of a bunch of co-conspirators, including, of course, Sustainable Energy for All, Rockefeller Foundation, UNECA, and UN high-level champions. And of course, we launched it at COP27 with a lot of support from a wide range of stakeholders. And part of the launch was a roadmap that showed 13 action items that would lead to unlocking the voluntary carbon market on the continent. And particularly pleased to be hearing from Helen at Afrexim, Franny at Southbridge, that there are instruments and opportunities that are looking to unlock this market. So we are all working towards unlocking the same, and ACME is playing a coordination role around that, as well as JP at UNECA. To make sure that this is a highly collaborative effort, we have a 15-member steering committee that I will be showing in short. Next slide, please. So we think of carbon credits and voluntary carbon credits specifically as one of many instruments needed in the climate finance topic. And so if we look at the quantum of dollars or money needed to invest in the climate space, we must make room for all types of instruments so that we're able to raise adequate finance. And so we see voluntary carbon credits as one of those opportunities and instruments that would lead to additional climate finance on the continent. That being said, we have tremendous unrealized potential. And so the idea is to look at how we change that dynamic to ensure that the potential that is possible on the continent can be achieved in a way that leads to unlocking substantial and transformative financing on the continent. Next slide. As you can see, there is tremendous growth at around 36% annually for carbon credits on the continent, but still that's starting from a very, very nascent size. And so there is tremendous opportunity to accelerate that growth. Next slide. But carbon credits are not just about climate finance. They also offer tremendous core benefits and could lead to improvements in livelihoods if properly structured, if transparently structured as well. So everything from agriculture and soil sequestration opportunities to renewable energy opportunities, to household devices, to supporting livestock, and to other job opportunities that can be created on the continent. The core benefits are tremendous. Next slide, please. And yet, as you can see, the unlock on the continent has been relatively concentrated around 5 countries, producing about 65% of the overall credits produced on the continent, which really is a very small number of countries and a very small number of volumes. So how do we come together, each of us, in our instruments to unlock this potential? Next slide. But what ambition is that? So what are we working together to unlock? What do we think would be the real numbers that we can achieve? At the moment, we're looking at 300 million tons of CO2 retired annually, $6 billion in annual revenue, and 30 million jobs, all by 2030, and even a higher ambition by 2050 as we accelerate the market. Next slide. But to achieve that, you have to unlock an entire ecosystem. While each of us is working on our individual activities, whether it's financing carbon credits, project development, policies and regulations, they need to come together to really drive the overall market unlock. And that is the role of ACME. And so what we did is analyze what are all the bottlenecks. And what that led to is, if you go to the next slide, a 13-item action plan that would go towards unlocking the opportunity. And we segment it among supply side, so making sure that countries are able to generate carbon credits. It's intermediation and financing, so exchanges and marketplaces, and financing mechanism for de-risking. And then on the demand side, ensuring that we have credible buyers, that we have advanced market commitments, that there is a signaling that should the projects be developed to high integrity, they will have a market. And then a number of cross-cutting activities around innovation, thinking about new methodologies, thinking about biodiversity and the nature credit model and so on. Next slide. And this is a view of the steering committee, but also to mention that since the launch at COP27 and leading up to COP28, as you've seen our ambitions, I'm very happy to say that we already have a couple of country activation plans underway, specifically the Kenya one, with a view to launching it at the Climate Action Summit in September. We have over $200 million in advanced market commitments. We've set up 5 thematic working groups that have been working across all the issues we mentioned, including one on driving methodologies. And here I'm delighted to mention that we're working on a methodology for livestock with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, supported by Sam, who's on our steering committee. We have been looking at, as I say, country activation plans, and their USAID and CEDA have been very supportive in unlocking opportunities. FSD, Mark, we are very grateful for your support in Mozambique, and we're looking at driving additional country activation plans to get us to the outcomes that we have planned. I will stop there. These slides will be available, and we'll also be providing updated information on where we have achieved since COP27 and what is happening between now and COP28. Thank you, Bogolo.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Last word. What would you like as a takeaway?
I think it's very, very important that as we think about Africa in terms of climate and as an opportunity, and James, you are the leading singer on this song, that collaboration is absolutely critical. I think Bogolo calls it radical collaboration. The reason ACME exists is so that each of us, with our strengths, with our lanes, work together to make sure that the sum of our collaboration is greater than what each of us can achieve. And I think Africa offers, from a carbon credit perspective, an opportunity to sequester part of the global carbon emissions, but at the same time drive economic development. So thank you.
Right. So the website is up for ACME. The email for contact is also on the website. We will drop it on the link in case you are inspired to collaborate with ACME to finance some project development as well, or country activations. Those partnerships would be very welcome. Thank you again, Joseph, and so good to see you.
So sorry to interrupt, but you've triggered a thought in my mind. We are currently inviting project developers to submit projects on the ACME website with a view to presenting a catalog to buyers. So if you are working on carbon credit projects, or you know of some that need either project developers, investors, or so on, the call for proposals is open. So please go to the website. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Joseph. And thank you everyone for joining this call. I will call on Nigel for a quick update on what is going to happen in Paris before I wrap up this call. Nigel?
Thank you, Bogolo. And thank you for amazing speakers. I mean, I find this really inspiring to keep learning just how much innovation is happening on the African continent, and Franny, I love the fact that you've named your fund innovation in Swahili. It's just an update. One of the things that I'm working on and will be formally launching in the Paris Summit is a climate finance mobilization accelerator. It's a radical collaboration to build on the work that everybody is doing here, not to replicate it, but as Naimeka said, we need to amplify this information. You know, the prevailing narrative is too much one of doom and gloom, and Africa's too risky, and Africa needs help, and everything's not fair. And there are elements of truth in that. But what we've heard today is so much positivity, so much innovation. So we'll be launching this accelerator at a side event at the Paris Summit. We'll have a lot of African commissioners on the commission that's behind the accelerator, and one of the co-chairs will be Catherine Kaufman, who many of you will know from the Development Bank of South Africa. So just to let you know, and I think next time we meet with this African meeting, we can give you all an update on the progress from Paris. So thank you, Bogolo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you to all of our speakers. So as I mentioned, we will do this every 2 months or so, and yes, we'll do this every 2 months, but for a special reason, this time we will have our next meeting June 30th to really reflect on the Paris Summit, what we think we should be carrying on to the Kenya Summit. And from there, we know that JP and UNECA will also be leading work around Sustainable Debt Coalition that was launched at COP27. So we really want to pick up more on what are the issues emanating from the fiscal stability of African countries and how climate debt can help to plug some of those gaps and challenges that we know they're facing, and get an update on the Bridgetown agenda that will be one of the main issues at this Paris Summit, and thinking a little bit more, Franny, we might call you back, but on financing nature, how do we really ensure that we are unlocking a proper financing for nature and not just thinking about nature from a conservation aspect, but really bringing in the commercial aspect of it and thinking of nature as an asset. So these are the areas that we would like to focus on. And what I believe is clear to everybody who has joined us today is that there is so much that's happening in the continent. It would be helpful for us to get together like this and to share some of the things that we're doing. So if you feel that you would also like to join our calls and share with the broader audience audience, please do drop us an email. Just respond to the one that sent you the invitation. And it's clear that we need more finance in the issues on debt, the issues on unlocking finance for the assets that we have. So we'd want to hear more around the innovations that are happening, innovation in this space. We want to know more about those that are doing projects in carbon markets, climate debt swaps, green bonds, blue bonds, all of that, and other forms of blended finance that you might be working on, so that we really do amplify your work and we share the positives that and the leadership that is being done within the continent. The goal is to really unlock more financing for the continent and to bring or really reduce this reductive definition of climate action that is solely focusing on science, but to bring development together and to show that climate action is an imperative of sustainable development within the continent, and that we can always do more. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. We will be dropping you an invitation for the next meeting. Please do share as far and as wide as possible. We want to continue growing this network of ours and share as much as we can to really show the activities that are happening within the continent. Thank you, and until we meet again. Bye.